Have you ever heard the story of the Crusade of Mad Girls? Or the story of the Ghost Girl of Torres Strait? Bet you've never heard about the female pitcher who once struck out Lou Gehrig and Babe Ruth in the same game. For answers to these and stories about women, found this folder recently in the Strange As It Seems archives entitled Women Miscellaneous. In fact, we probably should move this into this week and next with 2 episodes about extraordinary and forgotten women throughout history, as well as just kind of the everyday extraordinary women of the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. So let's dive in. Welcome back. I'm Jeff Hicks, curator of the Strange As It Seems archives and grandnephew of John Hicks, who created Strange As It Seems back in the late 1920s. So for the first of our 2 episodes on extraordinary women, we'll dive into women in history, as well as the John Hicks era of Strange As It Seems. Here we go. Let's start off like we usually do with stories from the early Strange As It Seems archives that go back in history to prior to Strange As It Seems. Here we have from 1946, among the first newspaper ads, interestingly enough, were appeals by ladies wanting husbands. When newsletters first appeared, they were the newspapers of their day. And along in the 1660s, they began to print ads, right? The first ads that were prominent. Firstly, it was soap makers, which is kind of interesting to me, considering Colgate-Palmolive was one of the first sponsors of the Strange As It Seems radio shows. But they were soap makers. Selling soap back even then, and also appeals by ladies who wanted husbands. Another one here, way back in 1900. Of course, this was 1945, so it's way back today. But way back in 1900, a French woman, Madame Guzman, she put up a prize of $20,000 to the first person contacting another planet. But Mars was ruled out because apparently that was too easy. Known as the Prix Guzman, it would still be in existence, except that it has more or less been wiped out by 2 wars. This is again in 1945. At its closest to the Earth, Mars is 50 million miles away. At farthest, there are 230 million miles apart. At the time the prize was offered, scientists were sure Mars was inhabited, but now they're not so sure. And here's an interesting story about women from history, actually Wyoming history, interesting. This is from the time of Elsie Hicks, my grandmother, when she ran the comic strip in the 1950s and 60s. But this was the first female jury in the United States was impaneled at Laramie, Wyoming. This is in 1870 to hear murder and cattle rustling cases. And the reason it was an all-woman jury is because the male jurors were afraid to convict some of the worst offenders. Speaking of women, I told my girlfriend, you really should embrace your mistakes. And she gave me a hug. And here's a little background on it as well. Not only that, but interestingly enough, Wyoming enjoys the unique distinction of being the first territory and state to give women full and equal rights of suffrage, including the right to hold office, interestingly enough. This suffrage act was passed by the first territorial legislature in December of 1869. So this happened, I guess, in March of 1870, about a year later. And just a really interesting story. The women were courageous enough to sit on the jury where the men weren't. At the opening of the court, the jury being in their seats, the judge addressed them as ladies and gentlemen of the grand jury. But as the judge finished, Stephen Downey, prosecuting attorney, arose and moved to quash the jury panel on the ground that said panel was not composed of male citizens as required by the law, but the court overruled this motion, Associate Justice Kingman concurring. And here's a rather strange story from the, looks like the very early part of the 18th century, when Lord Cornbury was governor of New York. And this is a story about Lady Cornbury, wife of the New York governor. She went around borrowing furniture and bric-a-brac, what a great word, bric-a-brac, from everyone in town, and she never returned any of it. But apparently the couple themselves, not just the lady, but the lady and the governor, were quite strange. This governor and his wife were the strangest pair in New York history. When anyone saw Lady Cornbury coming, they bolted their doors and closed their shutters. For whenever she came, she borrowed some pieces of furniture and never brought any of it back. But among other things, Lady Cornbury often stared in the mirror for hours because apparently she had fallen in love with her own ear. Crazy. The governor himself apparently also often dressed in women's clothes and capered around in the moonlight. So New York once had a transvestite governor as well, strange as it seems. And one more interesting and fascinating woman who was featured in 1946. This would have been in the Ernest Hicks era. Marie de Mancini. She was exiled because her uncle claimed he would stab her rather than see her queen. This is at the time of Louis XIV. He was madly in love with her and offered the uncle a fortune to marry Marie de Mancini, and he refused. We'll kick off now and just take a deep dive into the era of John Hicks, who created Strange as It Seems back in about, I think it was 1928 when it really first launched, and he ran it really until 1944. And here's one from 1931. Really fascinating woman here, cut out from an old newspaper in 1929 with the title Believe It or Not, which was, interestingly enough, Strange as It Seems' main competitor, Ripley's Believe It or Not, but a really interesting and rather beautiful woman, the much-married beauty, the delicate, almost spiritual features revealed by this recent photo of Adrienne Guimarch, a really interesting woman who apparently was the most married woman maybe in all of history. She had 50 husbands and 625 suitors. And the amazing thing was, during the whole time, she never got a divorce. You know, probably the biggest difference between men and women is when women hold something up and say, smell this, it usually smells nice. And apparently this took place in Belgium 10 years ago, I guess from 1929. That would have been 1919. It happened when she was 18. She began her career of high-pressure marrying. She pursued it assiduously all over the world until one of her former husbands chanced to walk into the church where the number 51 was being performed. There she was arrested, and her trial will soon take place, apparently. This is again in 1929. So she just went on a mad rampage of repeatedly marrying men all over the world and apparently draining them of their fortunes. Fascinating woman, Adrienne Guimarch, Belgium, way back in the early 20th century. And here's a interesting story that was actually featured in the Strange as It Seems radio show series. In fact, funny enough, I just published this radio show a couple of weeks back. I'll link it below, but found the story a couple of weeks later in this folder about Qing Lu. She's a beautiful Chinese girl and was married to a long-tailed Japanese rooster. Basically, the rooster was pinch hitting, apparently, for the bridegroom. It was featured again in 1945 after John Hicks had passed away in the era of Ernest Hicks. But one of the strangest marriage rites of Strange China was performed 2 years ago when Qing Lu, beautiful Chinese girl, was married to Zuzu, a sacred long-tailed Japanese rooster. The rooster, serving as bridegroom, performed his part all the way through the long and tedious Oriental ceremony, even to removing the veil from the bride's face and drinking wine from a common cup, symbol of their union. It happened that the rooster was called in to serve as bridegroom because the real husband-to-be was off to Singapore on business, and the father of the bride wanted the ceremony performed before his death, which he believed to be close at hand. And another woman that was featured in the Strange as It Seems radio series from the 1930s, Nell Brooke Stull. She actually appeared on the radio show herself, tons of letters here back and forth between Nell. Apparently, she was quite fond of my great uncle John Hicks, and again, they corresponded back and forth, but she had received over 32,000 proposals of marriage. Even though she was already married, she basically set up really a fascinating organization called the National Widow and Widowers Club. But the club was really not a matrimonial bureau. In the words of Mrs. Stull, the purpose is to relieve loneliness by establishing congenial friendships. Mrs. Stull goes on, it was in my hometown of Elyria, Ohio, that the idea was worked out. I noticed that at every social affair, a regular crowd of middle-aged women who never joined in having a good time, and some of the men didn't seem too happy either, and that began the idea. I had a party for middle-aged folks and announced I was going to form a club. Soon I was receiving applications from outside the city, an equal number of men and women write, asking for names of folks with whom they may correspond. I don't believe half of them enter the club with the idea of marriage, but quite naturally, many of the friendships that originate there culminate matrimonially. And this is probably my favorite letter of all from Nell Brooke. She says, Dear Mr. Hicks, you really are a dear. I'm very pleased with the props and the photograph as well. I sneaked in home yesterday with the expression on my face, just like the cat who had swallowed the canary must have had. This is apparently the day after she appeared on the Strange as It Seems radio show. I was so proud to have been on your program, and this is my favorite part, which John Hicks underlined, was with Ripley's Believe It or Not, 2 years ago, but this was so much more satisfactory. What is it that makes men chase women they have no intention of marrying? It's probably the same urge that dogs have that chase cars they have no intention of driving. Nell Brooke Stull, president and founder of the National Widow and Widowers Club, organized for the dissolution of loneliness, Elyria, Ohio. And here's an interesting story from 1942, sort of toward the tail end of the John Hicks era. It came from Steve Hannigan, Publicity. This looks as though it might be a possibility. What with women more and more getting into the working picture? Interestingly enough, this is kind of as women during World War II were getting more and more into the workforce as men were off to war. This is the active mother, Doris Peterson, a mother of two. She's an expert asphalt shingle roofer, cornhusker, and muskrat trapper. As a hobby, she also slaughters hogs for fun, and she hunts big game, writes poetry, paints, and sings in the church choir. And here's a lovely picture of Doris Peterson. You know, I was once arrested by a woman police officer, and she said, anything you say can and will be held against you. And I said, boobs, please. Speaking of World War II, there are quite a few women featured during the war, during the Second World War. Here's one. There's actually a letter from an Irvin John Scully. Says, gentlemen, I'm sending this to you at the suggestion of a friend who's employed on the St. Louis Star-Times. If you do not consider it worthy of publication, just forget it. But in the spring of 1943, the picture of my daughter, and this is her, beautiful, Madonna Jean Scully, then 16, appeared in the St. Louis Register, a local Catholic weekly. Marines on Guadalcanal saw it and voted her their mascot queen. And then, in the summer of 1945, her picture again appeared in the same paper, and an American unit in Belgium voted her the same honor, their mascot queen. Sergeant Teague, chairman of the notification committee in Belgium, identified his unit only as 334 HC Company. There's been no publicity on this second honor. Same paper, same girl, same honor. Madonna Jean Scully from St. Louis, Missouri. And a few of the extraordinary mothers of soldiers in World War II. We have here Mrs. John Diamond from Andover, Massachusetts. She has a son in each of the four branches of the U.S. Armed Forces, 1942, World War II, State Guard, Army, Navy, and Marine Corps. And here's a photograph of the couple, Mr. and Mrs. John Diamond, and their four sons across the armed forces, and a very, very nice letter from John Diarmond, touting his wife and mother of the 4 soldiers in World War II. Well, that wraps it up for this first of 2 episodes from the Extraordinary Women Miscellaneous folder from the Strange As It Seems archives. Stay tuned for next week, and we'll go into the Ernest Hicks and Elsie Hicks era and continue studying these fascinating stories on women here at Strange As It Seems.